This video will offend you. Early in my channel's life, I had to make a choice. Either pander to my audience and tell them what they want to hear, even if it means obfuscating the truth and pretend evidence isn't there when not convenient, or tell them how it is and take the backlash. Out of respect for you, I chose the latter. This created a series of videos where I either offend people leaning left or people leaning right, depending on the occasion. When it comes to today's video, I recently found two articles both belonging to the academic sphere, both pushing politically driven ideological nonsense that does not belong within university circles, which should instead not push political propaganda, but show evidence-based facts and never use modernism in their takes. The article today pushes modern identity politics in the Middle Ages. The other expert, which we'll address in the next episode, is pushing incoherent historical ideas to instead pander to the other side. Both are nonsense, so I'll debunk them. I'm giving you a clear disclaimer here. For today's video, if you're very left-wing and you don't want to hear it, skip it. For the next episode, if you're very conservative and you don't want to hear it, skip that one. For those still here who are just interested in cold evidence-based facts, let's dismantle away. White supremacy movement, a white heteronormative civilization. Religious same-sex communities in the Middle Ages, it's an insane way to put it. That this emperor basically identified as a woman, non-binary, queer and trans people. Identities like trans and non-binary had homophobes, white supremacists love the Middle Ages, so far-right obsession, the LGBTQ plus spectrum, gender variant, non-binary identity through the Middle Ages. Oh, don't tell me they're gonna say the eunuchs are transgender. Please don't make that parallelism. They were thinking about these questions about gender and sexuality in really dynamic ways. It's not a dynamic way to force someone into becoming a eunuch. It's not a dynamic way of thinking. Roland, you're a... Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today I found a very puzzling article from the University of Chicago. So use Chicago News, and here it is: The Hidden Truths About Sexuality and Gender in the Medieval World with Roland Betancourt. Scholar of Byzantine era uncovers the lost history about queer and trans lives in the Middle Ages. Now here's the thing. I have nothing against talking about sexuality. Absolutely, there are hidden aspects of sexuality that can be discussed and we can totally talk about. Nothing against that. However, when you discuss trans lives in the medieval period, I'm starting to think you're going anachronistic on me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're just saying this to, I don't know. Let's find out. As you know me, the truth. That's all you get on this channel. There's no politics. Can I say the same about this? Overview. We often think our debates around sexuality and gender are a modern phenomenon. Some people argue that identities like trans and non-binary have only existed recently. But could the evidence for queer and gender non-conforming lives actually stretch back centuries? Well, here's the thing. You have used a lot of terms here. Sexuality, same-sex, attraction, obviously they stretch back to the prehistory. But now you're saying identities, so the idea of identifying as a specific sexuality. Yeah, it's pretty modern. Transgender, so people suffering from gender dysphoria, I'm very open-minded to the idea that something like that would have happened. But would they be the same as modern-day transgender or trans? No. Non-binary is a modern concept. It's a modern approach. 100%. Now, can you find some areas of overlap? For instance, someone who identifies modernly as non-binary may be same-sex attracted. Well, that would overlap with someone in the Middle Ages who was a homosexual. So yes, there will be areas of overlap, but there will never be a cohesive, consistent, perfect overlap of the modern terminology, specifically when it comes to gender identity and the schools of thought, or the way people thought in the medieval period. That would be ridiculous to expect. In a recent book entitled Byzantine Intersectionality, Professor Roland Betancourt of the University of California, Irvine uncovers an overlooked history from the Byzantine era. His work shows how surprisingly modern medieval conversations about sex and gender were, or, as he puts it, how medieval our modern conversation seem. As extremist groups on the alt-right have begun to claim an ideological lineage to Byzantium, Betancourt's work has become a critical work for contextualizing our current moment and drawing lessons from this neglected history. Well, here's the thing. This is where the situation, I think, starts to become very dangerous. Clearly, a very left-wing approach. The alt-right have claimed some nonsense stuff, like the connection with the all-white, which I have debunked myself in ancient Roman classical antiquity, specifically in the context of architectural expression, which was polychromatic in nature. I haven't said this to exhaustion, statuary, and all that. Yes, so that was nonsense. However, if the entirety of the main focus of your work is to attack your political opponent's thought, then I'm afraid you're going to swing the pendulum past the historical accuracy just to get points against them. Now, is that going to happen? Very likely, I'm going to say, but I could be wrong. And in fact, if I'm wrong and he does a perfect, like he just touches on the correct historical analysis, looking at the truth and only the truth and telling it how it is, fantastic. But is that going to happen? I don't know, because I'm already seeing a cocktail of words which, yeah, are anachronistic in nature when discussing the medieval period. Alright, transcript. Paul Rand. Hello listeners, this is just a note to say that today's episode explores adult themed, including sexuality and gender. If you share our podcast with your kids, you may want to give this one a listen on your own. I appreciate that. Age-appropriate discussions, 100% approved. First, thanks for listening and please enjoy this fascinating episode. Alright, we're starting well. Paul, when historians of the future study a modern white supremacy movement, what does that have anything to do with? One of the most prominent figures they'll uncover is Jason Kessler. I haven't got a clue who that is. You may not know who Kessler is, I don't, but you're probably familiar with the infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Is that when like someone drove into a protester with a car? Is that it? Yeah, I think that's what it is. Of course, I condemn any form of violence, but I'd like to see what the connection to the medieval period is. A month after this insidious day, Kessler started a project he called the New Byzantium. Oh, I see. It was an attempt to tie distant history to the present, built on the premise that after Rome fell, the Byzantine Empire was there to preserve a white, heteronormative civilization. With some of my work, and has recently traced a popular iteration of Byzantium, especially in the far-right groups, they don't really know how to deal with it and what to do with it. So here's the thing. You know, recently, I've starting to Twitch. And I'm not talking about, well, yes, I do play video games on Twitch. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying whenever I hear the word far-right, I have a little twitch. I do that also when I hear the word woke these days, and then I get a little twitch. Because people use this too much. They call everyone far-right. So I imagine this person in question is a extremist, and I hate all forms of extremists. They just piss me off. But it's just stronger than me when I hear, because now people call you far-right even if you are 16 centimeters to the right of Karl Marx. So there is that. Let's keep an open mind. The Middle Ages has recently become a real sticking point for a lot of far-right white supremacists and a lot of homophobic discourse and transphobic discourse in the present. Man, Roland, how could you? I wonder if he trained for this one. Like, did you rehearse to be able to put all of these words into one sentence? Oh, here we go. And these NAZI groups, let's say the Austrian painters sympathizers groups, are turning out in Ohio, and the purported motive behind the attempted arson of the Ohio church, blah blah blah, intimidate. Well, of course, it's always wrong to harass and intimidate people just because they are transgender. I'm strongly against that, but man, you use all of your virtual signaling words and what are they called? Dog whistles? Holy moly. In the last few years, Betancourt has written op-eds in Time magazine, Washington Post, explaining not only this far-right obsession. I'm curious, how many times far-right? How many times do they use that? What about alt-right? Doesn't appear. Something wrong because I saw it. Hyphenated? Yeah, hyphenated. White supremacy. They had to get it out their system, and then they actually focus on the history. So homophobes love the Middle Ages, all right. Where were we? Homophobes, white supremacists love the Middle Ages, okay. Far-right obsession with Byzantium, okay. Betancourt has uncovered a fascinating lost history of non-binary and trans lives that until now has gone untold. Well, great, present the evidence, because usually I'm the one who says, guys, all of these gender identity concepts do not belong to classical antiquity, to the Bronze Age, to the Middle Ages, because they're a modern approach. Sexuality, gender identity, and all that kind of stuff, gender studies. Could you imagine a gender studies professor at Oxford in the 12th century? I'm just saying. But if I'm wrong, hey, I'm more than happy to say it. You got to show me the evidence, though. So far, you've only got like homophobe, white supremacist. Can we see the evidence, please? In 2020, Betancourt published a synthesis of his research of this era called Byzantine Intersectionality, Sexuality, Gender and Race in the Middle Ages. Got all three. At its core, this project is really about showing how our current debates about sex and gender aren't as modern as we think they are. I think they are. They didn't just start this decade or last decade, but centuries ago. I always say, and that's a fascinating statement, I'm waiting for the proof. I always say people might assume that I wrote this book to make the Middle Ages modern. And one of the things that I was always shocked about in the process was how medieval the modern world is. And I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily all the time. There are fluidities and openness in how we think that were inherent in the Middle Ages. And there are resistances in how we think that were also there in the past. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of the medieval church and the Crusaders, just to mention a couple, thought. I hope they would have been to the idea of gender fluid, homosexual relationships and same-sex marriage and surgery for transgender people. I mean, I don't know how open-minded they would have been to that. Maybe that's just me. We live in a time when debates about the rights of non-binary, queer and trans people have made their way to the headlines and even our legislator. Exactly, we live in this time, which means the Middle Ages weren't this time. Okay, he's going into super politics. I don't care about Republicans and Democrats and 150 bills. Right, can we talk about the history, please? Paul and Betancourt thinks the histories of how people in the Byzantine era thought about sex and gender have something to teach us today. So that's the message. Alright, I'm skipping around a little bit whenever I see politics or stuff that is just fillers. Byzantium spoke Greek and Latin, especially in its early days, and so they had access to the Bible in its source language of Greek. Now that's debatable because I would say that only the New Testament's source language was Greek, whereas the Old Testament's source language is Hebrew. I know that this has been challenged by a certain individual I might cover in the future, and they believe that it was the source language was actually Greek, and then that was translated into Hebrew. I disagree with that, and it's a fringe opinion. Oh, here is a question I like. Well, there's many different doors you could have gone in to study this period of time, but you have chosen to focus on sex and gender in this culture. I wonder if you could tell us why. That is a very good question. I think we are overly fixated, in fact, particularly in American discourse. Let me put it out there. Why did he focus on this? Roland. So I was really struck by these very interesting and subversive narratives that colleagues had either overlooked or sought to normalize. I'm also a Latinx, first-generation American, and also a queer person. So for me, a lot of that part of my identity have also helped me to be more sensitive to some of these stories. Okay, so let me say something about this. So what I'm about to say is not a right-wing or a far-right position. It's not obviously a left position. Let's just call it my own personal take. No politics. I'm just trying to be sensible here. But I would definitely say that one of the things that I was most struck by in my research was just how much the sources themselves can speak in eloquent ways that you might not even expect them with our own modern eyes. And I think that that is the problem, sir. Your own modern eyes. I have a feeling, because of how this presentation to this, that you see what you want to see. Not always the case, but with very modern ideas and very modern concepts, I think you are putting on a filter. You're putting on glasses that give you something that makes it appear. Like when, for example, when I debunked that article that was saying that transgender Viking army, it's a biological female, but she was buried with a shield and must have identified as a man. So it's a proof that transgender... No, that's just you applying modern filters to the ancient past. It's not the past being eloquent in modern ways. That's what I say as someone who spent 2 decades looking into the past. And so I was really interested in how a modern critical language could be deployed, there you go, to bring out these stories and tell a narrative of Byzantium. Yeah, it is a narrative, it appears to be. Paul, and looking at this era on sex and gender, if we could talk a little bit, move into this whole idea about identities during this period. Oh my gosh, oh no, I can't believe it. Eunuchs? Oh, don't tell me they're gonna say that eunuchs are transgender. Please don't make that parallelism. If that's what it is, guys, I think we've read enough. Roland, one thing that's really critical about the Byzantine world is that there is an extreme number of eunuchs. So there is in ancient China. Eunuchs held very high-ranking positions in the empire. Paul, can you explain eunuchs for us, please? Please. Roland, sure. So eunuchs were essentially young men, probably before puberty, who had their testicles removed. Can I underline against their will? They were not this idea of the eunuch as a slave that I think we have as popular imaginary. They were really high-ranking figures, some of them, and literally the figure who sleep beside the emperor, the imperial guard, were positions reserved for eunuchs. Yeah, oftentimes even in ancient China, they make them into eunuchs because then they can have them sleep in the same court area as women and daughters, because of course they can't do anything with them, so that's the whole thing. And we have very high-ranking eunuchs who are the treasures of the empire. Yep, commissions buildings, manuscripts, various works of art. It's correct? They were even described as angels. Roland Betancourt. So oftentimes the depictions that we have of angels of being very pale with white flesh and white hair is often modeled on how eunuchs appeared in the period. First, anecdotal. Second, you need to provide source for that. Third, isn't this white supremacy? I don't know, man, because you are the one obsessed. And so because of this, you had a real confrontation with the body and its secondary sex characteristics in ways that really allowed a lot of space for figures who we might call gender variant in various capacities to exist in this world. It's insane. He's going there. He's going there. I cannot believe the mental manipulation here. Also, these eunuchs exist. I don't want a strongman. People are going to accuse me, Metatron, you're strong. Okay. The preamble to this is clear when he's going. Can you see it? Can you see it? But yeah, let's read it. I'll use his own words. One of my colleagues, Lee Devan, has a great book called The Shape of Sex that traces conversation about non-binary identity through the Middle Ages. Man, this reminds me of that video that I watched at one point where this absolute total idiot was saying that in the Middle Ages, homosexual relationships within medieval knights were not frowned upon. In fact, they were encouraged. I swear, this is a twisting of facts that it's in fact disrespectful, not only towards those who are interested in the truth. You see, I'm getting a little worked up. But also it's disrespectful towards people who were not straight and suffered because of it. Take this point for a second from me. Can you imagine someone who says, like, you resurrect a homosexual from the medieval period who was actually stoned to death, okay, because of that, and then he has to hear someone making a video saying, well, you know, LGBT folks were actually respected and were in positions of power. For instance, knights were encouraged to have same-sex relation. This guy's like, do what? They stoned me to death, you absolute moron. Tell it how it is. Doesn't matter if left or right. Tell it how it is. Because the moment your fixation with attacking the other side's extremists puts you out of nudges you off the rails, and you start not telling it how it is, you start manipulating the facts, that's when you need course correction. That's what my channel is all about. Doesn't matter who does it. Course correction. You can have 15 PhDs, I do not care. Throughout the Middle Ages, and see how the 13th century, the influx of ancient texts like Aristotle into the West really developed this obsession with the idea that the reasonable human had to exist in gender binary. Here's the thing, a lot of things are binary, man. And if we really have concepts and philosophical ideas, and if we really have to go there, why everyone has to think that everything has to be a binary concept? Well, binary and non-binary is a binary concept. How about that? And before that, especially with a lot of early Byzantine sources, there is this great deal of embrace of this idea that Adam was possessing both sex, that because of the course, Eve is produced from Adam. And so you see what I think is really interesting here is that Byzantium, well, yes, okay, let me finish it. Byzantium, because it has this corpus of knowledge accessible from early on, and also has figures, eunuchs, that upset these binaries. Eunuchs were victims. They did not choose. It's on a completely different planet from an adult who's making a choice and decides to undergo a certain surgical procedure in a free country. You're an adult, do whatever you want. That has nothing whatsoever to do with eunuchs. They received a form of violence. So let's not try to be like, oh, but they had positions of power and authority. I'm sure that if they had a choice, become a eunuch and get castrated, let's use the word, or would you rather keep your natural belongings and not get that position of history? You know, I'll give it I think majority of people will choose that. Upsets these binaries, that once again, binary, non-binary is a binary. They were thinking about these questions about gender and sexuality in really dynamic ways. It's not a dynamic way to force someone into becoming a eunuch. It's not a dynamic way of thinking. Throughout its history, with its own moments of reticence and attacks as well. Paul. There is evidence of all kinds of people across the LGBTQ plus spectrum in Betancourt's research, but we'll start with same-sex attraction. Of course there is going to be same-sex attraction, but if anyone says the gays were invented in the 80s or the 50s, they're wrong, okay? Of course same-sex attracted people have always existed. Does anyone even say that they didn't exist? I don't know. You tell me, because maybe once I read an idiot saying that. No, gay people, they didn't exist in the medieval period. Maybe once, and I blocked him because he was stupid. I don't think that's the main discourse item of a lot of these speakers out there, whether you like them or not. There is a lot of interesting evidence in the medieval world that demonstrates just how common same-gender intimacies were, and these various forms of queer relations were. And once again, queer is a word we need to define in the medieval context. Depends what you mean. That we often tend to assume would not have existed. No, they did exist. Who's we? Who's we? If you create an item of discussion, an argument that no one is saying, and then you debunk it, you're debunking a straw man or an idiot. A single idiot. But because this is all that, oh, we need to discuss this massive misinformation campaign, who assumes that same-sex attracted people, gay, lesbians, didn't exist in the Middle Ages? Of course they did. They just had to hide it. That's the truth. And if they did exist, they came about with a lot of heavy-handed panic. John Boswell, who was a historian at Yale, very famously made the argument that Byzantium had a modern equivalent to same-sex unions. Oh, because there was this rite known as the brother-making rite that has nothing to do with same-sex marriage at all, where two men could be joined, a spiritual brotherhood. They could share the same bed, live together. This has been oftentimes described as a sort of queer space for queer lives to exist. The reality is, I have actually tackled this. No, it's not the same as same-sex marriage. However, incidents of same-sex marriage did exist in the past. It's not necessarily something that never existed in the past. It was extremely rare, but this one specifically was not meant to be. It was literally a brother making right. It's just that obviously, if you are gay and you've got your lover who is also gay, but you're hiding it, well, this is a fantastic opportunity in the medieval context to be like, you know what, let's say that we are really good brothers and let's do this so we get some rights, we get some succession rights, we can live together and share a house, but then in reality, without telling other people, then they would basically be living into a same-sex relationship. Of course it happened, and in fact some church authorities complain about it. So it did happen, but it doesn't mean that it would be similar in any way, shape or form to same-sex marriage the way it is today. Completely different kettle of fish, apples and pears. Yeah, there we go. As you can see, the Vatican archives shows otherwise. Roland says, in fact, you even have church fathers in later centuries attacking this right specifically because it leads to some unsavory practice. Exactly. So that actually proves my point, not yours. Paul says he's also found art writings that speak to same-sex coupling in monasteries. Roland, we see a lot of interesting evidence within monastic communities, religious same-sex communities. Religious same-sex communities in the Middle Ages, it's an insane way to put it, where you have this articulation that two monks might fall in love with each other and they might begin to have sex, but they were supposed to be chaste. So again, this is massive. Like, as I was thinking, this is clearly take a modern position, apply it forcefully into the medieval period, try to find them. The moment we see a single small area overlap, oh look, it's modern, it's similar to and it's not. They're very different. I'll put a link in the description, feel free to read it. Oh my gosh, they even have a section on Elagabalus. Ooh, that's gonna be, I gotta read that one. I've gotta read this one. They're gonna say it's a she and she had preferred pronouns. That's what they're gonna say about him, Paul. And there is another story that came that you brought up in this book, and I'm going to mispronounce this a little bit wrong, but Emperor Elagabalus, pronounce it for me. Roland, ooh, I wish I could have heard that. Yeah, I think people pronounce it variously, and then he says it. So in English you can say Elagabalus, but if you want to say it in classical Latin, it's Elagabalus with a retracted S. Both are long when it comes to phonemic vowel length. People say quite differently, especially between British and American pronunciations. It's Latin pronunciation I think he's asking about. Yeah, this is a late Roman emperor, double. He's a Roman. Actually, he's not. He's the one we shouldn't call Roman, who we have preserved in the Cassius history, a really negative view of the emperor, yep, but a really negative view that is really structured completely on ideas about the indication that this emperor basically identified as a woman. It's ridiculous. Okay, you're a Roland, you're a if you say this, and please refer to my dedicated video to Elagabalus. After you watch that, tell me I'm transphobic. Tell me, watch that video, and then after you watch that video, call me transphobic if you dare. Then you know you're a liar, because that's not what it is. I am lie-phobic. I'm not trans, I'm lie-phobic and truth-centered. That's how it is on this channel. And this is a lie. If there is a transgender historian who agrees with me, and I feature this historian on that video, so it's not just me, oh, it's a far-right Metatron. No, Metatron, it's Truth Metatron, and a transgender historian, and we both agree that Elagabalus did not identify as a woman, nor did he have preferred pronouns. And this guy, Roland, instead, is clearly pushing lies, because he needs to debunk the alt-right, which I'm like, debunk away. Don't substitute lies with more lies just so that different flavor, because then I'm gonna attack you as well. And I will. Identified as a woman, even went as far as to ask Roman surgeon that if they could produce a vagina in their body so that they could have both organs. Paul, There are some people who want to claim that concepts like non-binary and trans are modern-day inventions, but Betor believes his work proves, definitely, if his work proves it because of Elagabalus, it's ridiculous. But I think we are overly fixated on gender and sexuality. It's literally there are people that base their entire life on sexuality. To me, when studying the past, this would be a fringe topic. Now, given, people could tell me, well, yeah, for you, because you're straight. Someone who is gay or someone who's transgender, maybe they're interested into seeing if there were people like them in the past. There's nothing wrong with that. I recognize it's a subjective approach. I think we've gone really over-fixated on everything, genders, everything. And I think it's a little excessive sometimes, but to each his own, freedom of speech. As you know, I'm very centrist politically, so sometimes I will agree on some things with the right, sometimes I'll agree with some things with the left, and sometimes I disagree with everyone. But here's the thing, when it comes to identifying yourself through your sexuality, to me, it's the wrong way to do it. For me, and that's just me, I'm just sharing my opinions freely, feel free to disagree, your sexual orientation is how you are, not who you are. So, when I define a friend of mine, rather than saying, oh, this is my transgender friend, Tom, or this is my gay friend, Luke, or this is my, not that anyone does it, but this is my straight friend, Mike, at that point, let's equalize it, I would say this is Tom. Now, if it does become pertinent to any discussion we're having, and we need to speak about their sexual preference, orientation and whatnot, then yes, Tom is gay. Mike is straight. He's into chicks like me. Whatever. Philip is transgender. I don't think it's good from a mental position to make sexuality your defining factor. The one feature that delineates what you are. It's how you are. And I'm not trying to shame anyone once again. I'm not a hateful person. I do believe this fixation on this is what I am, this is who I am, I don't think it's good. But that's just me. For those of you who are here for the first time, I'm not here to spread any form of hate. I'm just here to seek the truth. There is no politics, no political agenda, nothing, I don't care. If someone says something that is nonsense, I'll call it out for nonsense. If someone says something that is correct and consistent with documented evidence, I will say they are correct. And that doesn't mean that I agree with everything they stand for. What they said is congruent with the truth. That's all you get on this channel. There's no politics. Can I say the same about this? Overview. We often think our debates around sexuality and gender are a modern phenomenon. Some people argue that, alright, so I think I've debunked enough, we jumped around a little bit, but yeah, it's nonsense, it's political nonsense, as always, and so here I am, your to-go place for non-political and not agenda-based, simple, real truth. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.